But right now, we're joined by a man. This is kind of a special interview for me, to be honest, because I know some people have Captain Kangaroo, some people have Flippo the Clown here in Ohio. Boy, there are just a ton. Lucy and Aunt Fran and all these people who were popular all over the world. When I was growing up, there was a gentleman on WGN television who played the part of Bozo the Clown. His name was Joey Dioria, and he was kind of my Captain Kangaroo when I was young. But one thing you might be interested to know is that Joey has had an amazing career. He's a tremendous actor, part of the theater, on stage, has done a lot of television, appeared on Johnny Carson, The Gong Show, you might remember. Ladies and gentlemen, Joey Dioria. Joey, how are you?
Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm doing well, Joey. How are you?
Terrific, terrific. My goodness, it's terrific to be on the air with you. And my goodness, it's a funny thing because, you know, I did dinner theater in Dayton, Ohio, a number of years ago. And I worked with an actor, a fellow by the name of Dave Eaton, who had a kids' show in Dayton, and the show was called Good Time House, and he played a character called Charlie Goodtime, and he was also a bozo in the Dayton area.
Is that right?
Yeah.
How about that? Well, I got to tell you, Joey, I don't know how much you like to talk about the bozo days, but the truth is WGN has been on in this area of Ohio, since the Dumont days, I believe. I mean, it's been here forever. And you were the bozo that was on in my area, and being the age that I am, when I was growing up, I don't remember Bob Bell. I don't know why. I've seen him as bozo, but the first bozo I remember is you, and that it's kind of unique to get to talk to you.
Well, you see, that's what happens as time goes on. When I first, when the Bozo show ended back in 2001, people would interview me, and they would all say, "Well, of course, but Bob Bell was the Bozo I grew up with," and now I'm getting the age of interviewers who only remember me.
Well, you know what? And this is interesting. Bozo is interesting. It's a fascinating subject. But did that tick you off when you were doing those interviews, when you wrapped up? Because you had done Bozo at that point for, 17
years.
17 years. Did that tick you off that because Bob Bell was the first to do it on WGN, that you were kind of, I don't know what they considered you?
And also ran.
Were you always in Bob Bell's, were you always trying to, maybe not personally, but in other people's eyes, were you always compared to Bob Bell?
Well, I think that was the advantage that I had over every other actor who auditioned for the part when Mr. Bell retired. I had never seen the Chicago show. I was never, I never grew up having to live up to that because I didn't know the character. And it's very interesting because there were Bozo shows from Maine to California back in the 50s and 60s. They franchised the shows. So I never really felt that I had to live up to anything. My first, about 6 months after I'd been doing the show my first year, the general manager of WGN called me into his office and asked me how I was doing and how I felt, and I said, "Oh, just great." He says, "You doing a good job?" I said, "Well, I like to think so." And he said, "Well, here," and he tossed a stack of letters at me, and there were about 6 letters in this stack. And he said, "Open one, any one." I said, "Okay." So I opened up the first one, and it basically said, "Dear WGN, the new guy playing Bozo stinks. We hate this guy. We do not want to see him on the show. Get rid of him. Get back Bob Bell." And the other 5 were pretty much worded similarly.
Really?
And I looked at the general manager, and he laughed. And he said, "We only got 6 hate letters."
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah, he said, I'll be honest with you. If we got, he said, 150 of them, I wouldn't have worried. If we got 300 of them, I might have said, oh, wow, this is a problem. He said, but if we got over 1,000 of them, we were going to fire you.
You know, I don't remember this. I don't know why. Maybe it never happened. But because Bozo obviously is a fictional character, did they make any on the show, on the actual Bozo show? Did they shine any light on the fact that it wasn't Bob Bell anymore and that there was a new guy under the mask?
No, there was an awful lot of national publicity when Bob Bell retired, and there was quite a bit of debate at the time of how they were going to do this. Al Hall, who passed away recently, he was the producer on the show for, oh my goodness, pretty much, I would say out of the 40 years the show was on the air, at least 30 of those he was the producer. He basically said that they didn't want to make any more of the change than they had to. He said that it was going to be obvious that unless they hired a guy who did a spot-on imitation of Bob Bell doing Larry Harmon's Bozo, that people were going to notice that there was a difference. So they just wanted to find a guy who would just do the best show that he knew how. Although it was interesting, a week after Bob Bell retired, a guy broke into he didn't break in. He came barging in to the studios in a Bozo costume, wig, nose, hair, suit, shoes that he had all made himself, that were a duplicate of Bob Bell's. And this guy was doing an imitation of Bob Bell. And just, the guards had to literally carry the guy out. But Al said that he was watching the guy, and he had obviously grown up with the show and knew the show so well that he was literally doing Bob Bell. And they said it was interesting. He said it was fascinating that the guy had Bob Bell's character down so much that he was able to do that. And he says, but then it got kind of creepy.
Well, Joey, did Bob Bell or Larry Harmon, and for those who don't know, Larry Harmon owned till he passed away but his widow, Susan Harmon, still holds the character. Yes. Yes. Did they ever call you after you went on the air, Bob or Larry?
Well, I first met Larry Harmon about 3 months before I went on the air. After I was hired by WGN, I had to go to Larry Harmon's office in Hollywood. I lived in Los Angeles at the time, and I had to be measured by Larry Harmon for a wig. Harmon not only had the franchise of the character and had everything done, but he had a company that he dealt with that manufactured wigs for the actors playing Bozo. So that was when I first got to meet him.
And what was he like?
Oh, well.
the obvious question there.
That is, if you met Larry Harmon, you got what you saw. He was a very effusive man. I would say he was in his early 70s at that time when I met him, but very enthusiastic. Bozo had been a tremendous part of his life since he first took on the role. He'd been hired as a fellow who did Bozo appearances at supermarkets and shopping centers back in the 50s. And he was so taken with the character that when Capitol Records was going to just, scrap the show, he bought the rights.
A good thing to do.
Yeah, well, it was not only a good thing to do, but it was a smart thing to do. The thing that many people don't realize about Larry Harmon is that he was more successful in making Bozo a national television icon than even Capitol Records was able to do. Capitol Records. I had the opportunity of meeting Alan Livingston, who created Bozo for Capitol Records. And Alan Livingston even told me this story. is that they spent a fortune in the early 50s with Bozo trying to make him a TV star. They had a television show written. The show was directed by the son of Hal Roach, the man who teamed Laurel and Hardy.
Can't go wrong there.
Yeah, I mean, and they wrote it as a sitcom almost. It was a story about a little girl who had a Bozo doll, and every now and then, when the little girl was alone, the doll would transform into a life-size actor who played Bozo, and they would have adventures together. But the show never took. And they tried several different Bozo show concepts, and none of them took off. It wasn't until Larry Harmon franchised the show that Bozo became extremely successful. And Harmon filled a niche that no one else was able to do.
He certainly did, and right up till the time he passed, very interested in the Bozo character, very protective of it.
Very protective, very protective. The only, I would have to say, thing that I would ever fault Larry Harmon was the fact that he still maintained that 1950s television mentality, because none of the things that he ever spoke about to me seemed any different from what he'd been doing all those years. And television had changed so much, and the concept of theater had changed so much in regard to children's performances and children's characters, that it just seemed that it was the same thing.
Bob Bell, he lived in the same city you lived in doing Bozo. Did he ever comment on it?
Well, Bob Bell lived in Chicago, but by the time I had come out there, almost 8 months had passed from the time that he had done his last show, and he and his wife had moved by that time to San Diego, California. So I did not meet Bob Bell pretty much my entire first season on the show.
Really? Did he ever call you?
No.
None of that?
No, and I think, and he had a reason for that too. He just did not want to intimidate me or in any way influence me.
When you first spoke or saw each other, what was it like?
That's a bizarre story.
Then I want to hear it.
It was in the middle of one of the shows, and I'm doing the program and I'm entertaining the audience, and I happen to look behind me, and there, standing where the cameramen and some of the technicians was a very distinguished gray-haired man in a three-piece suit, very dapper. And I'm thinking to myself, must be some Tribune Company executive, because they're all pretty much, laughing and kowtowing to him, and I could see he was an important fellow, and but I didn't know who he was. And at one point, I found myself over by him while we were doing another segment on the show, and he kind of leaned over towards me and said, "How's it going, Boz?" And I said, "Oh, it's fine, going very well, very well. Are you enjoying the show, sir?" And he went, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I'm about to do something next called the Grand Prize Game. It was a pleasure talking and meeting with you." And I shook his hand and I left. As I walked away, he turned to one of the cameramen and went, "That silly son of a gun doesn't know who I am." And I heard that and I went, "Oh man, did I just insult some Tribune executive?" So during a break, he's still there, and I'm kind of in a hidden-off area with Roy Brown, and I said, "Roy, who's the geezer in the suit?"
Oh.
And Roy said, "You don't know who that is?" I said, "No." He went, "That's Bob Bell."
Oh, jeez.
I went, "So that's Bob Bell."
After that's a funny story. After that, did he like your Bozo? I guess
very much. We had a great time because after the show was over, and after the audience had left, and I was out of makeup, we met at a restaurant. It was him and me and the producer Al Hall and Roy Brown. And as we're sitting there, I said, I have to apologize. I didn't know who you were. And he said, "Well, it suddenly dawned on me, why should you?" He said, "You've never seen me in anything but the Bozo outfit." And I went, "Yeah, that's true." He says, "Well, you're doing a great job." He says, "I wish you a lot of luck." He says, "It's been a lot of fun." He said, I wished I could have still continued to do the show. Bob had to quit because of health reasons. And he had a heart aneurysm, and that was why he left the show.
You talked about meeting Larry Harmon before you started as Bozo. Once you had done it, did he like your Bozo?
Larry Harmon, I'm trying to think. It never just came up. He would come to GN on pretty much regular basis to renew the contract with WGN. And that was pretty much it. I never really sat down and spoke with him again during my 17 years with the show.
That's interesting. Joey, I know we got to let you go here in about 4 minutes. We've got Helen Thomas coming up. I didn't mean to talk the whole time about Bozo.
Oh, it's quite all right.
I wanted to talk about Johnny and the Gong Show, but because we'll have to have you back, and we'll talk more about that. But since we've kind of done a thing here on Bozo, I want to finish up on that. Tell me about Bob Bell's original cohorts became your cohorts, Roy Brown and Marshall Brodeen, Wizzo and Cookie.
I tell you, I never had so much fun with a bunch of guys. It's terrific. You go into a strange city and you suddenly have a new bunch of friends. Roy Brown, I think the main thing with Roy Brown was that they had to find somebody to be Abbott to his Costello. They needed someone to be Hardy to his Laurel. And I think that the advantage that I had over many of the people who auditioned for the show was the fact that I understood the old vaudeville and burlesque style comedy that Roy and Bob Bell had done for so many years. During my first interview on the show, I went into WGN, and there was Roy sitting in the studio waiting for me, and he looked at me and he said, "I broke my leg in 3 places." And I said, "Don't go in those places." And he turned to producer Al Hall and he went, "So far, so good."
Tell me about that wacky wizard, Marshall Brodeen.
Marshall Brodeen, an incredible magician, a lighthearted, wacky man. I often said to my wife, I want to be Marshall Brodeen when I grow up. Because he was incredible. He made his fortune on the TV magic cards.
Yes.
And from there, he built an empire on magic tricks and magic sets that he would sell either online or in stores. And he had a wonderful life. He did what he did. He loved what he's doing. He's now I would have to say retired now completely. But he still lives in Illinois.
When Roy Brown, who eventually passed away, but when Roy and Marshall left the show, did it ever feel the same to you again?
Well, there were a couple of transition periods where I always felt that Roy was going to come back.
Yeah.
He had some very serious heart problems, and he. I know he always wanted to come back. I'd visit with him and his wife, and sometimes we'd go out to lunch together. And he just desperately wanted to come back because he loved doing the show more than anything. But there was a period where it was a transition period where there were things where we're just not running on all 8 cylinders. We had Adrian Zemed, an actor that people might remember from, I think it was called Dance Fever.
Oh, yeah.
And he also was on T.J. Hooker with William Shatner.
Yes.
Right, he was the young rookie guy. And he was a wonderful, wonderful actor and a lot of fun and a terrific guy. But he understood the style of the show because he grew up with the Bozo show, and he was a wonderful sidekick, and we had a lot of fun together. But we never got that camaraderie going until Robin Urich joined the show, who played Rusty the Handyman.
I remember him toward the end.
Yes, well, Robin was a terrific guy, and I'm talking like he's dead. Good grief. Robin is a terrific guy. As a matter of fact, he and I are going to be working together.
Doing what?
Again in June in Indiana.
You guys will have to get in a car and come over to Ohio.
You know, I would love to do that.
That would be the biggest thrill of my life. You have no idea.
Because Robin's background was in improv theater. And he was he's done so much improv comedy and improv comedy and he was so fast on his feet that he would be throwing out all kinds of gags and things that you'd often think, gee, I wish we were recording this because he is just so darn funny. But we're going to be working together at the Red Skelton Clown School.
Perfect.
And we're going to be doing a whole series of classes on clown comedy. I believe that'll be June 5th through 10th in 2012 in Red Skelton's hometown of Vincennes, Indiana. If you're on Facebook, go look up Red Skelton Clown School, and you'll see their website. It's pretty terrific. They have a big clown parade. They have bathtub races. They've pretty much taken the home where Red Skelton was born and have had a tourist destination. It's quite an event.
Joey, I know we have to let you go, but I have to ask you two questions really quick to wrap this up on the whole Bozo thing. You have to come back, as I said. Number one, you said you're going to the clown school, Red Skelton. Mm-hmm. So obviously clowning is not a bad thing for you. 17 years as Bozo, haven't been in those shoes in about 10 years now. Would you ever do Bozo again?
Would I ever do Bozo again? I'm 59 years old. I think I'm a little long in the tooth for that. I think right about now I've done Bozo. I've enjoyed it. I enjoy clowning. I enjoy clown comedy. But in regard to doing the daily grind of a kids show again like that, probably not.
One-time appearance, would you ever do Bozo?
Well, I would probably not do an appearance. WGN has asked me to do appearances. But I live in Los Angeles, and they're in Chicago, so they have somebody else who actually puts on the suit and appears at parades and functions that they do there. So I don't really see the point in it. If WGN was to do a special or something like that, I would probably suit up again and do it if they were going to produce something like that. But off the top of my head, I would probably have to say it's not likely to happen. So no.
Do you have the suit?
No, I don't have any of the materials. All of that stuff belonged to WGN. The only thing I still have is one of the noses.
Final question here, Joey. I know we have to let you go, but the voice I'm hearing, and boy, this is radio, and the voice the listeners are hearing, obviously is not the voice that came out of Bozo's mouth. Just a quick one here. Where did that voice come from, and can you do the voice? Oh, yes, I can still do the voice. When I first started doing the show, I based the voice on Milt Larson, the owner and operator of the Magic Castle here in L.A., who did a voice right about here. And it was yep, that kind of thing. But eventually it slipped into my own voice, and eventually it got a little more adenoidal and came out right about here. And that was pretty much the voice that I did. My wife said that there was a thin line between me and Bozo, and for 17 years I slowly erased that line. Can you, right before we get out, can you do the voice and announce the grand prize game?
Okay. So, are you all set for lots of fun and fabulous prizes? Well, get ready, because it's time to play Bozo's Grand Prize Game!
Joey Dioria, you have no idea. You've made my night tonight.
Well, it was delightful talking with you, Scott, and I would love to talk to you again. I can tell you a number of crazy stories about L.A. when I worked for Milt Larson, and I had to bring up Cary Grant in an elevator.
Good.
How I got to carry the boxes containing Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snerd for Candace Bergen's father, Edgar Bergen.
And you were on the Tonight Show. You did the Gong Show. There's a world, a wealth of information.
Well, we've had a lot of fun. I understand that Betty White has been one of your guests.
Yes, Betty White was on right before the big craze where she took off.
Yeah, well, I worked with Betty White in a radio show in Santa Barbara, California, where I did George Burns to her Gracie Allen.
She's wonderful, isn't she?
She is wonderful, and she's delightful. And another member of that cast was an Ohio boy by the name of Jonathan Winters.
Is that right?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'm going to tell you the quick story about Jonathan Winters because it was so funny.
Go ahead.
There were a lot of us actors there, and we were all sitting with Jonathan Winters, and oh my gosh, what a brilliant, witty man. And he looked over at me, and he said, "So how'd you get your start?" And I said, "Well, I got my start working in dinner theater in Dayton, Ohio." And he went, "Well, I'm a Dayton boy." And I said, "I know." I said, "Because it was the Winters National Bank that foreclosed on the theater." And he went, the Winters Bank foreclosed on your theater? I said, "Yep." He goes, "Well, that was my granddad's bank." He said, "That would have pleased my mother. That old broad hated the theater."
Jonathan he's brilliant. I mean, he's in another world.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, gosh. Joey, as I said, you have to come back. It's been wonderful, and there's so much more to talk about. One of my childhood heroes certainly was Joey Dioria's Bozo the Clown. It's been a lot of fun, and I'll email you, and we'll set something up for the future.
That would be great. It was very nice talking with you, Scott.
Thank you, Joey.
All right, bye-bye.
Joey Dioria, Bozo the Clown on WGN around 1984. I think he took over, and right up through the end, 2001. Going to take a quick break here and play a taped interview with Dean of the White House Press Corps, Helen Thomas, on the death of Muammar Gaddafi. I believe it's the only interview she did on this subject. Helen, take it away. Then we're going to come back with phone calls, Sean Kraft in studio, all kinds of good stuff coming up.